Harvey Jacobs had lived in room 213 of the Westfield Veterans Home for nearly 8 years, and in all that time, he had never spoken more than a few words at a time. He wasn't angry or rude, he just didn't speak unless absolutely necessary. Most of the staff had stopped trying to get him to talk, and the other residents had long accepted that Harvey was just one of those quiet old soldiers who had seen too much and chose silence over stories. Every morning at 6:30, Harvey would shuffle slowly to the dining room, take the same seat by the window, eat his oatmeal without a word, and return to his room, where he'd sit in his worn recliner, staring at a black and white photograph that rested on his nightstand. It was a photo of a young woman with dark eyes and a playful smile, dressed in what looked like a 1940s sundress, her hand frozen mid-wave as if saying goodbye or hello. No one knew who she was. The photo had no name, no frame, just the creased edges of something that had clearly been held many, many times. Nurses speculated, of course. Some said it was his wife. Others thought she might have been a wartime sweetheart, someone he'd lost in Europe or the Pacific. But Harvey never answered when asked. One new resident, Mr. Langdon, once joked loudly that the woman was probably a Hollywood starlet and Harvey just liked the fantasy. Harvey didn't react, didn't look up, didn't frown or smile. But the next day, Mr. Langdon was found sitting alone at breakfast with a black eye, and nobody ever brought it up again. Then came Alex Rivera, 24 years old and fresh out of school, hired as an assistant activities coordinator. He had that kind of bright, innocent energy that hadn't been dulled by the weight of institutional care work yet. On his first week, he made laminated bingo cards, organized a movie night, and even tried to set up a social media page for the facility. Most of the older residents either ignored him or politely tolerated him, but Alex didn't seem discouraged. On his 5th day, he was asked to deliver medication to room 213. He knocked once, got no reply, and gently pushed the door open. Harvey was in his chair, staring at the photo as always. Alex stepped in quietly and set the pill cup and water on the table, then paused for a moment, glancing at the photo. Something about it made him freeze. The face in the photograph, it was her. The woman he'd seen in dozens of family albums, the same face on the mantel at his grandmother's house. It was unmistakable. That was Josephine Cortez, his grandmother. A chill ran down his spine. He looked at Harvey, who hadn't moved, though his fingers now pressed slightly harder on the photo's corner. Alex tried to speak, but his throat was dry. "Sir, where did you get this picture?" Harvey didn't blink. Alex took a breath and tried again, softer. That's my grandma. That's Josephine Cortez." Silence. Then, Harvey slowly turned his head, his eyes sharp and focused for the first time. "Your grandma," he said, voice raspy like a dry leaf scraping against a sidewalk. It was the first full sentence he'd spoken in years. Alex nodded quickly, his heart racing. "Yes, sir. She lives in Bakersfield now. She's still alive. I can't believe it." Harvey leaned back, eyes distant now, and whispered, "She told me never to come back." Alex had no idea what that meant. What could his cheerful, church-going grandmother have to do with this quiet veteran? What history had lived in the silence of room 213 all these years? Alex tried to press, but Harvey said no more. The door was gently closed behind him, and he stood in the hallway, mind spinning. That evening, Alex called his mother and asked her about his grandma's younger years. She was reluctant at first. "Why do you care about ancient history?" But eventually mentioned something vague about Josephine being engaged before the war, to a man who never returned. "She said he died," Alex's mom said. "Or maybe he didn't. I think she got a letter. She burned it, actually. Never talked about it again." Alex hung up with more questions than answers. The next morning, Harvey was waiting at his usual table when Alex walked in. Their eyes met briefly. Harvey didn't speak, but tapped the chair across from him once, then returned to his oatmeal. Alex sat. For the first time in 8 years, Harvey Jacobs had invited someone to sit with him. And although no words were exchanged during that meal, something unspoken had cracked open. The photo still sat on the nightstand, and the past had started breathing again. The following morning, the usual quiet routine of the Maple Oak Veterans Home was disrupted by the buzz of whispers and curious glances. After last night's mysterious piano melody, many residents were unsettled, unsure whether it had been real or a dream. Harold sat alone by the window in the sunroom, his wrinkled fingers tracing the condensation on the glass as he stared into the overcast sky. The tune still echoed in his head, a song he hadn't heard in over 50 years. He didn't say anything to the staff, but he noticed others were shaken. Miss Lorraine, who rarely left her room, was already in the hall. Earl, the man who refused to wear his hearing aid, had it in since sunrise. Even Thomas, who usually slept through breakfast, was awake, walking the halls like he was searching for something, or someone. It wasn't long before the mystery gained a name. Midnight Melody, some began calling it. Others chalked it up to the wind or imagination. But not Harold. That song had meaning. That song was personal. That night, Harold couldn't sleep. He waited by his door with a cup of cold coffee, listening. Midnight passed. Nothing. Then, at 12:17 a.m., the sound came again, soft keys on the old out-of-tune piano in the rec room. The tune was precise, delicate, the same one from the night before. This time, Harold didn't hesitate. He grabbed his cane and shuffled quietly through the corridor. When he reached the rec room, it was empty, but the piano cover was open, and one key was still slowly rising as if just played. He stood there for several moments, heart thumping. Then he turned and saw Thomas standing behind him. "You heard it too," Thomas said. It wasn't a question. Harold nodded. "That song. I knew that song during the war," he whispered. "It was from a French village we passed through. There was a girl, Marie. She played it for us when we stopped to rest. First time I felt peace in months." Thomas looked stunned. "Marie," he repeated. "My father used to talk about her. He said he met her when he was stationed in France. He brought home a photo of her playing a piano. You don't think?" The coincidence hung heavy in the air. Over the next week, more stories began surfacing. Lorraine said the melody was the same one her late husband used to play after long nights. Earl claimed it was on a record he and his brother listened to before enlisting. A pattern began to form, connecting the music to moments lost in time, memories hidden behind layers of trauma and age. Then one morning, a new resident arrived. Her name was Clara. She was quiet, reserved, and wheelchair-bound, with soft white hair pulled back into a bun. But when she was rolled past the piano, her eyes locked on the instrument and lingered there. That night, at exactly 12:17 a.m., the melody returned, but this time, Harold was waiting in the rec room before the first note played. And Clara was already sitting at the piano. Her fingers danced over the keys with confidence and sorrow. She didn't seem surprised to see Harold. "You remembered," she said softly. Harold took a breath. "That's your song. You're the one playing it." Clara nodded, eyes shimmering. "It's called The Soldier's Waltz. I wrote it for a young man in France. He never came back after the war. I never stopped playing it." Harold felt tears rise. "Marie?" he asked. She smiled sadly. "No. Marie was my sister. She died in the shelling. I kept her music alive." From that night on, the piano wasn't silent. Each night, Clara played, and residents came to listen. It became a ritual. And slowly, the music began to heal them. Thomas started writing again. Lorraine began speaking to staff instead of shutting down. Even Earl, always gruff and bitter, requested a photo of his brother for his room. But not everyone was happy. The nursing home's new director, Ms. Peterson, didn't like the late-night gatherings. She believed they disrupted sleep schedules and posed a liability. "It's not a concert hall," she snapped during a meeting. "We have rules here." She ordered the rec room locked after 10 p.m., but the veterans weren't going to let that stop them. They made copies of the key, took turns distracting staff, and even used the laundry chute to sneak in. It wasn't about rebellion. It was about remembering. Each note Clara played peeled away layers of silence. One night, she stopped mid-song and looked directly at Harold. "You never told me your name," she said. "Harold," he replied softly. "I was in Normandy. I think I might have met your sister. She gave me a locket." Clara blinked back emotion. "I've always wondered what happened to it." Harold reached into his pocket. His hands trembled as he opened a worn leather pouch. Inside was a tarnished gold locket. He placed it gently on the piano. "I promised I'd return it someday," he said. The room was silent, save for the sound of Clara's sob. She took the locket with reverence and kissed it. "Thank you," she whispered. From that night forward, the song changed. It wasn't just about sorrow anymore. It became a song of memory, of reunion, of long-promised closure. Even Ms. Peterson, eventually, stood outside the door one night and listened. She didn't say anything. But the next morning, the no playing after 10 sign was gone. Life at Maple Oak shifted. The veterans began telling their stories. One wrote letters to a daughter he hadn't spoken to in 20 years. Another confessed to his nurse that he feared being forgotten. The piano, once an ignored relic, became the heart of the home. And every night at 12:17 as the first note played they gathered, some in wheelchairs, some with walkers, some barely able to sit up, but all drawn by the music, by the memories, and by the hope that maybe, just maybe, some songs never die. As the autumn leaves began to fall and the wind carried a quiet chill through the open windows of Oak Ridge residence, something had shifted within its walls, not just in the air, but in the hearts of those who called it home. Ever since James had brought the old radio to the common room and begun playing the songs that once echoed through their memories, the home had come alive in a way no one had expected. What started as casual gatherings became full-blown traditions. Wednesday music nights turned into storytelling sessions, Saturday afternoons were filled with chess and coffee, and soon, even the staff began to look forward to what the veterans would come up with next. The mysterious postcard that had reignited James's spark was never spoken of again, but its impact lingered. After his emotional recounting of the war and the loss of his closest friend, he changed. Not in a dramatic, loud way, but in the subtle way someone changes when they've found a reason to keep going. He smiled more. He asked others how they were doing. He began helping a new resident, Walter, who had arrived weeks ago, disoriented and bitter, convinced he was forgotten by the world. James saw in Walter a shadow of his former self, the guarded look, the defensive posture, the gruff replies that hid real pain. So James sat with him. At first, Walter cursed and told him to get lost. But James didn't budge. He sat there, sometimes saying nothing, sometimes telling the same story twice, until one day Walter asked, "You always this damn persistent?" And James just smiled and said, "Only with people worth the trouble." That moment marked the beginning of something no one saw coming. One by one, others started opening up. Harold, who hadn't spoken more than a few words in months, started humming along with the old war tunes. Cecilia, who used to keep to herself in the sunroom, began knitting small hats and scarves for the nearby children's hospital. Even grumpy old Mac, famous for throwing mashed potatoes when he was angry, started helping the nurses with morning cleanup. It was as if the spirit of camaraderie had returned, a bond only those who'd seen life, death, and the long road in between could understand. But it all came to a head one rainy afternoon when a state inspector visited unannounced. Dressed in a stiff gray suit, clipboard in hand, the inspector roamed the halls with a look of disapproval. She noted the cracked tiles in the West Wing, the aging heating unit, and the lack of modern interactive therapy devices. After her final round, she summoned the head nurse, Maria, and spoke in a clipped, official tone. "Frankly, this place is outdated. These men and women deserve better. I'm recommending that this facility be reviewed for closure and the residents transferred to more advanced homes." The news hit like a punch to the gut. Maria, usually composed, was nearly in tears. But before she could respond, a voice came from behind her. "Ma'am," James said, standing tall despite the cane in his hand. "With respect, I think you're making a mistake." The inspector turned, startled. James didn't wait. "You see cracks in the floor, we see lines on a battlefield. You see old walls, we see shelter and shared history. You're looking for electronics and modern distractions, but what we have here is real, connection, dignity, life." Others began stepping out of their rooms. One by one. Walter, Harold, Mac, even Cecilia, holding a tray of tea like it was a weapon of peace. They surrounded James, not in defiance, but in unity. "We're not just patients," James continued, "we're people. Veterans. Friends. We've fought wars, built families, lost everything and rebuilt from ashes. And now we've found a place where we matter again. Don't take that from us." The inspector looked around, visibly shaken. For a moment, she seemed unsure, her grip on the clipboard loosening. Then she simply nodded. "I'll reconsider," she said softly, and walked away. In the days that followed, word of what happened spread. A local journalist caught wind of the story and came to interview the residents. Their pictures made the front page of the Sunday edition with the headline, the home that fought back. Donations started coming in. A retired architect volunteered to renovate the West Wing. A high school offered to run tech literacy classes for the veterans. Even the children from the nearby school began sending drawings, letters, and handmade cards. The radio in the common room played louder now, not just in volume but in spirit. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of amber and lilac, James sat on the back porch with Walter. "You ever think we'd end up here?" Walter asked, watching the clouds shift. "Not like this," James replied, "but I'm glad we did." "Me too," Walter said quietly. As a light rain began to fall and the first stars poked through the sky, a group inside broke into laughter. Someone had spilled pudding again. The nurse scolded them, but her smile betrayed her amusement. And in that laughter, in that warmth, in the bond forged by pain and kept alive through kindness, Oak Ridge Residence wasn't just a nursing home anymore. It was a battalion of memories, a fortress of friendship, and a final post where the war was finally over, and peace had a name.